So we're just starting session 2. Reimagining human animal relationships. The first presentation that we have is from the lens of micro.
Yeah. So hello, I'm from Slovenia. I'm a junior research fellow at the Institute of Philosophy at the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts, and I'm writing my PhD, obviously on the topic of human-animal relations. So today I'll present part of my thesis and also part of an article that will get published in autumn that is titled "The Tropological Animal Beyond Body and Brain." I'll read so that I won't break my tongue. I'll break it anyway. It's also really nice to be here because we have a sort of vivid scene of activism already in Slovenia, but not so many people on the level of education are working with the topic. So it just started 2 years ago, and actually my PhD will actually be the first one on the topic. That will be. Oh, thank you. I didn't want to say because it's just to see that it's really nice to talk with colleagues from the same field, not only with professors with whom you're working with and activist colleagues. So first part is starting from sovereignty to multitude. So what is at work in arbitrary distinctions between the human and the animal can be called as a form of sovereignty tied to the biopolitical caesura, but not as sovereignty as a right or capacity to rule, but as a form of violence. With Derrida, a form of stupidity, absurd and excessive. For how else might we describe the claimed superiority by humans over animals, whether based on intelligence, communication, organization of politics, if not as a kind of stupidity, detest, which in its very exercise confirms a right to stupidity inherent within sovereignty itself. At the end of his book, The War Against Animals, Vladimir proposes a revision of the concept of sovereignty, to think about animal sovereignty and radically reimagine our fundamental political concept. So he identifies coexistence and plurality as two crucial features of this new reimagined sovereignty. He proposes a concept of truth, a mutual recognition and consideration of former animals, and speculates whether it is possible to treat sovereignty as an essence. Vladimir also adds veganism to the list, but not as a form of biopolitics, but as a challenge to human sovereignty, a breakthrough. Fahim Amir, the Viennese philosopher, his first and practically brand new book, Being and Swine, The End of Nature as We Knew It, from 2020, picks up where Vladimir leaves off. Being and Swine is a plea for politicizing the animal question on the basis of slightly paralyzed Marxism, which Amir calls zombie Marxism. Amir treats humans and animals as members of the same political species, the swinish multitude, or even the mosquito or termite multitude. But most importantly, he treats animals as political subjects, agents of their own liberation, showing that any community, any multitude is always already multi-species, but inevitably shaped by class relations and colonialism. Through an analysis of the functioning of the links between society, history, economy, everyday culture, and politics, he traces the flow of the material and discursive techniques and logics of the violent management of life and death from the animal to the human sphere and vice versa. So similar to Vaudeville, Amir attempts to rework and expand a familiar leftist political and ontological concept of the multitude. To imagine the multitude as a form of trans-species alliance. So in one of the chapters titled Swinish Multitude, He introduces a trans-species swine society in 19th century New York, where people and pigs work together to measure. He traces the origin of the term, the Swedish multitude, to the French Revolution. The term was coined by the political conservative Edmund Burke in his text, Reflections on the Revolution in France, for pejorative purpose. Burke at that time was, of course, not aware of the extent to which the term would later be used and appropriated, or be appropriate. Burke's Swedish multitude is therefore a monstrous figure. It is mobile and lawless, and it abandons the order of things. It is also important to note here that the Swedish multitude refers both to the people revolting like hogs and hogs revolting like humans, and is therefore not only a term of political radicalism to trouble time social conflict, but radically troubles the graduated ontological premises of traditional stilistics and anthropology. Trans-species multitude is thus also significantly shaped in anthropology. So in this sense, another notable example in Amir's book is his reworking of the pejorative comparison between man and animal, coined by Friedrich Winslow Taylor, and also mentioned firstly by Gramsci. In his most famous work, Taylor, Principles of Scientific Management is the title, from the beginning of the 20th century, Taylor used a number of parables to convey his idea of scientific rationalization of the work process. And his favorite was the story of Schmidt, a stocky Pennsylvania German who was a big iron welder at Liverpool. Schmidt loaded about 12 tons of the 92-pound iron pigs each day and then ran home for what he did. So using Taylor's principles, scientific managers raised Schmidt's output to 48 tons per day, of course, raised his daily wages. But, as Taylor points out, Schmidt was able to achieve this success not only because of Taylor's science, but also because he was a high-priced man who does just what he's told to do and no backbone. Needless to say, Taylor was known for his studied disregard for the work. If Ford was inspired to set up the first assembly line factory after a visit to Chicago slaughterhouses, which were already using the same processes but in reverse, Taylor saw the result of rationalization of the work process is responsible for in assembly line turning people into trained gorillas. Amir returns to this image of trained gorillas at the end of his book, first noting that communism as an unredeemed promise of humanity will let the apes out of the zoos, physically and metaphorically. He then refers to Marx's writing about the relationship between English and Irish workers. What is true of them is also true of the relationship between humans and animals. There can be no freedom while there is still unfreedom. And continues. We may not yet be able to fully picture what this might mean, but there is no reason we should not begin to imagine, to use words and images, emotions and deeds, to make reality subtle, as in the seemingly utopian vision of gorillas in the mist. So at the end of his work, Amir points to the temporality of multitude in the form of Taylor's appropriated and subverted trained gorillas, which Negri and Hart, who were responsible for popularizing the concept, referred to in their work Multitude, War and Democracy in the Age of Empire. So multitude, as a concept, caught in the strange double movement of always already and not yet. Amir's multitude means something like quantity, which, in contrast to the mass or the crowd, does not mean a merging into a greater whole. At the same time, it refers neither to the people, neither to the population as the object of political governance. It is positioned as the opposite of the state, and as such denotes the production of acts of resistance to irreducible multiplicity. So in this sense, his definition, Amir's definition of the multitude, corresponds in part to multitude as understood by Negri and Hart. with the important difference that while Negri and Hart emphasize that multitude is also a concept that includes aspects of race, gender, sexual difference, their multitude consists only of humans. Their multitude aims to go beyond modern concepts like sovereignty. They see the multitude not as one political body that commands, but as a living flesh that governs itself. So, on one hand, they stress that this is a new kind of body, a common body, democratic body, but on the other hand, they foreground its fleshy elementary quality precisely as a departure from the tradition of the use of the concept of the body in political philosophy. Following Merleau-Ponty, who argues that the flesh is not matter, is not mind, is not substance, it's common and is elemental, and this elemental flesh of the multitude is maddeningly elusive because it cannot be entirely poured into the hierarchical formats of a political body. So they write a kind of monstrous anti-de corpore, which is supposed to oppose all modern political debates about the body and to embrace a new relation between the communal and the singular in the flesh of the multitude. But even if they dissociate the multitude from the concept of sovereignty, in a sense, they still understand it as a productive populative figure. So far, so good, but let's be clear that biopolitical operates with the body. Necropolitics, on the other side, with the flesh and the gut. I'll get to the second part now, titled Beyond Political Flesh. In her text, Afterwards, Struggling with Bodies in the Dawn of History, Marina Gurjanic, who is working on the topic of necropolitics and colonial studies and also feminism, follows Alexander Michelia's proposal that in the time of necropolitics, we have to elaborate on carnality, flesh, and God, as the viscus in the title of his book, Habeas Viscus, could be translated. Necropolitics is, of course, a term from Achille Mbembe in his essay from the beginning of this century. Gurjanic suggests even more precise distinction between the body as a device of biopolitics and flesh. She suggests the term political flesh, which has a political relevance in the time of necropolitics. So not coincidentally, after this proposal, Gurjanic in her article exposes the connection between racism and speciesism. Because each time we introduce flesh, we cannot avoid its carnal shadow, its deading referent. Deading referent is a sort of a mixture of James Stanesco's Deading Life and Adam's Absent referent. The animal is being constantly reproduced in the process of neoliberal global capital structuralization, and precisely for that reason, as Gurjanic states in her foreword to the Slovene translation of Mbembe's Von Negre, non-humanity is a category that offers the possibility of a new paradigm of politicization. She then also draws a parallel to Merleau-Ponty's flesh, but with a slightly different emphasis than Negri, with flesh as the source of knowledge to a point where the perceiver and the perceived cannot be disentangled. But even more importantly, she invites us to think about the agency of political flesh. This being a starting point for thinking of common evolve, the somatic power of a compartmentalized and contained political flesh. Since necroaesthetics is somatic, all bodily encompassing, it produces a bodily reaction, which implies a new way of perceiving and to attune our senses differently. It is a relation to feeling the whole body knowledge. Jackson, in the code of her book Becoming Human, Matter and Meaning in an Amateur Letter of 2020, titled Toward the Somatic Theory of Necropole, extends Mbembe's view of colonial racialization that produces and is produced by the spatialization of populations itself. Her aim is to show how social processes, the prison cell, the political party cell, the military cell, interact with somatic cellular processes, producing alterations to the immediate cellular environment and cellular functioning in a manner that we might also describe as negative. So if humanist construction of the subject is premised on the objection of non-human, on the objection of the black body, on processes of containment and compartmentalization, I want to emphasize that when rethinking and reimagining the alternatives to the fundamental concepts such as subjectivity and agency, we must not seek inclusion to the tradition of liberal humanism, but rather think of decolonial desubjectivation as a politics for the 21st century. Key aspect of this decolonizing work is seizing or really taking back the physicalization of that bond between human and non-human, reoccupying and deploying it in terms that continue to reject the separate binary. Rethink it with member in terms of becoming co-agency as a matter of movement, crossing, transformation, not as a matter of ontology, but to position it as a melange of multiplicity of vital being. This being a base for the new collective subject that is at the origin of new language. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, I'm presenting the document.
Okay, thank you.
And this is the argument in defense of
Great, thanks a lot. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you can see it now.
Yes, it's perfect.
Great. Yeah. So, thanks a lot for your time and to the Center for Human Animal Studies for having me as a speaker today. I'm going to present a paper that will hopefully be part of my thesis, and I plan on speaking for around 15 minutes. If I take longer than that, please feel free to interrupt me in any moment, and I'll be happy to stop at any point. Yeah, this paper is in a very early stage. I presented it in a workshop full of analytical philosophers a few weeks ago, and I'm really looking forward to present it here in a different environment, because the argument is based on dependency, and dependency is a topic that has been mainly studied by people working in other fields different from analytical philosophy, such as critical theory, continental philosophy, and so on. So I'm really looking forward for disagreement and objections. So first, let me briefly introduce the topic and make some clarifications. So as most of you will know, the field of animal ethics has been mainly focused on duties towards animals that are domestic or domesticated, such as animals in farms, animals used for experimentation, or companion animals. And only recently, the field has been open to explore duties towards wild animals as individual beings, not as part of the environment or as part of species, but as individual beings that merit individual consideration. And inside this field, there are two main views. The first view is that humans have duties not to harm wild animals and to assist them in cases where we can do it, so to help them when they are in need. And there's other view that considers that there are duties not to harm wild animals in all cases, but duties to help them are only triggered in specific cases, such as cases in which we have harmed these animals in the past, or we have actively created them, or we have altered their ecosystem. My argument is part of the second group of views, but trying more or less to show that this second group of views will lead to the similar conclusion than the first group of views. And the second clarification is that, well, the title is a dependency argument in defense of assisting liminal animals. Well, this was a clarification for I made for people that are not aware of animal ethics. but I'm sure most of you will be familiar with the fact that liminal animals is just a term used to refer to those animals that are wild, but that live in spaces controlled by humans. This was a term coined by Sue Donaldson and Will Kimlicka. And liminal animals can be pigeons, raccoons, swans, mice, rats, and dogs in public parks. So animals that live in a wild state, but in spaces that are altered by humans and whose life is affected by our modes of living. So having made these clarifications, I can present the argument. That is, I've designed the argument in a logical structure to make it clearer. I will simply present it and then try to justify every premise very briefly. So this is the argument. Two premises and one conclusion. So premise one, dependency creates a duty to care for and assist those who are dependent. Premise two, many liminal animals are dependent on humans. Conclusion, we have the duty to care for and assist those liminal animals that are dependent on humans. First, before justifying the premises, I need to define dependency. Well, when I started writing this paper, I mapped the literature on dependency that is mainly focused on the ethics of disability, and I couldn't find any definition of dependency. And for that reason, I decided to propose a very simple, incomplete, and a definition with many problems, but that can work for the purposes I'm using it. So just a definition of dependency that says that an individual A is dependent on the individual or group B if A's life or well-being are contingent on the actions of B. Of course, it has many problems. It can't account for the many interdependencies people have to each other. But I think it fits the most paradigmatic cases of dependency we can think of. So the cases of dependency of children to their parents, dependency of disabled people to their carers, dependency of workers to their employers, to companion animals to their keepers or guardians. I think that the definition, well, it can work to represent the dependencies in most paradigmatic cases of dependencies. So having clarified this, I can try to very briefly justify the first premise. Well, this is a moral claim that most people take for granted and do not justify, because most people think there's no need to justify the premise. So in the field of animal ethics, people have argued that in the case of animals we have domesticated, such as animals in farms, well, the fact that we have made them dependent on us for everything, from feeding to reproducing to having a place to where to sleep, that automatically creates duties to care about what happens to them. And I think that's true, but I think that needs a justification. And what I did in the paper is show how different theories justify this premise. I think there's no need in this case or in this presentation to go through every of them. In the other time I presented it, well, I explained how consequentialism and Rawlsian primary goods justify the premise. I think there's no need to do that, because well, even if I need to do that in the paper, because I have more space, more time to do it, and I'm trying to justify every premise, I think that is quite straightforward, that relations of dependency create duties to care for those who are dependent. Anyways, if you are interested on how to justify this premise, I would be more than happy to to share the draft of the paper, or even in the Q&A to try to explain how these different theories justify this premise. So let's, just for the sake of the argument, assume that dependency creates a duty to care for those who are dependent. And let me try to show how the second premise is also true, accepting the working definition of dependency I provided. So think of different dependencies that humans create for liminal animals. So liminal animals can be harmed by being run over by cars, by crashing against windows and bright lights, by having their ecosystems altered in ways that reduce their access to food or the likelihood they are to be eaten by predators, by drinking polluted water we have effectively polluted, or by breathing polluted air, and by harming them in these ways, we create relations of dependency, situations in which they need help, and in which we are able to help, and we are the only source of help they can find. This can be the case of injured pigeons after a crash, starving coyotes after their ecosystem was altered by urbanization, or diseased squirrels after eating polluted water. In these cases, their life and their well-being is contingent on our actions to help them. We can, I don't know, treat or euthanize the pigeon if the injuries were too severe. We could feed the coyote. We could bring the coyote to a sanctuary. We can move it to another more suitable ecosystem for the coyote. We could give the squirrel treated water and drain. Give the squirrel treated water and drain the polluted water. So in all these cases, according to the definition, these animals are dependent on our actions. And if dependency creates a duty to care for and assist those who are dependent, then we would have duty to care for these animals. But also, it seems that there are many cases of dependency that are not caused by human actions, but by natural factors. And it appears that in paradigmatic cases of dependency, the fact that dependency is created by humans or created by nature, or that the dependency is internal to the individual, does not affect the duty to assist these individuals. So consider the case of a disabled child who is dependent on their parents. In a case like this, it doesn't seem to matter whether the dependency was created by a natural genetic alteration or that was created by their parents engaging in risky behavior during pregnancy. What seems to matter is that the child is dependent, and that creates duties to care for the child. So accepting this, the duty to care for dependent liminal animals is extended to more animals than the ones we've harmed. So consider the cases in which liminal animals can be harmed by natural factors such as floods or droughts or accidents, wildfires, diseases, starvation due to competition of food, overpopulation, or whatever. In many cases, these animals can fit in the definition of dependency. Their life or well-being is dependent on our actions. We could save animals from floods and accidents. We can vaccinate them, and actually, we commonly do it. We provide them food. We can sterilize them to reduce their populations and improve the well-being of their dependents. In many cases, we are the only source of help we can find. In some cases, we help these kind of animals that face these harms created by natural factors, but we do it for pure anthropocentric reasons in many cases. So when we vaccinate wild animals, we do it because we don't want them to transmit us diseases. We try to cure, save animals from accidents because we think we should conserve the species. And I think that the same could be done just for the sake of helping the animals themselves when they are in need. So if this is true, it follows from the premises that there's a duty to assist many living animals that are dependent on humans, simply because they are dependent on humans. Yeah, this was all. I didn't want to take much time, and definitely looking forward for objections, feedback, and disagreement. Thanks a lot.
Oh, sorry, I'm not used to this one. Right, will it work? Yeah, great.
Hi everyone, I'm Melda. Can the folks online hear me well? Just give us a thumbs up.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah? Okay, cool. I'm honored to be here. This is my first ever conference that I'm presenting in. I'm like 2 months into my PhD. Thank you. So sorry for the apologies for the nerves, and I'm just really honored that I'm with you guys because that makes me feel a lot more comfortable than doing it in front of boring academics. I'm really glad Richard left, but don't hope this is recorded. Anyway, and just I'm like shaking like a leaf. Sorry. Also, the Mediterranean passion that will show up in this presentation. I'm very passionate about my research. This morning, I woke up and I realized I've been thinking about this topic for the last 10 years. I've been vegetarian since 13, vegan since 17, and I've been writing essays on animals since I was 13. So this morning I woke up and I was like, shit, I actually don't know anything about this subject, even though I've been thinking so deeply about this for the last 10, 11 years. I'm 24, next month. Anyway, so this presentation will be about my work in progress so far. I don't have much to tell you, so it will basically be my PhD proposal. I really welcome critical smashing feedback. If you feel like I'm in the wrong path, just please let me know so I don't suffer like you guys. But I feel like it will build up on Louis' presentation because I am also looking at anthropocentrism and how that's organized within society. So I'm quite multidisciplinary. I'm based at the Open Uni's business school because that's where the funding is, right? But I'm looking at organization studies and sociology. So one of my supervisors is based in social sciences, sociology, and my primary supervisor is based in the business school. So this is quite a new, what do they call it, intermarriage between two subjects, so critical animal studies and a field called critical management studies within organization studies. And it's never been really thought about just because critical animal studies has focused on sociology, philosophy, and other social sciences and humanities subjects. So here we go. First, a little bit about the research context. So I am situated, I want my research to be situated in the animal industrial complex. So as we all know, industrial animal agriculture sits at the intersection of the most pressing issues that we face today. So it's the cause of environmental devastation, massive amounts of non-human animal suffering that is normalized and systemized, unfortunately. The next global pandemic and the previous ones, 75% of pandemics are caused by zoonosis, and global food insecurity and injustice. And these interrelated issues are, not surprisingly, have been constituted through our harmful relationships with non-human animals, and they are rooted in what we call anthropocentrism.
¿Quieres que lo pida a la universidad?
Which Louis has given a wonderful definition, so I'm not going to go into that. So anthropocentrism has also been institutionalized, systemized, and normalized through our pervasive exploitation of non-human animals through the animal industrial complex, and I'm sure a lot of you are by now very familiar with this concept. So from henceforth, I shall refer to animal industrial complex as AIC. Right, so my research, surprisingly, also has to be situated within management and organization studies because I'm funded by business school, right? I'm based in critical management studies, so my research will be critical. My argument is that management and organization studies in the past have not been critical enough. So MOS, which is Management and Organization Studies, they've mostly neglected the relation of this discipline to non-human animals. However, quite recently, since the last few years even, there's been a few special issues in critical organization studies journals. A really lovely book called Oxford Handbook of Animal Organization Studies, which just came out in December 2022. So literally very new. So if you're interested in what organization studies has to say about and what animal organization studies even is, I'd really recommend you check that handbook out. Really good essays. Not all of them are like liberatory or vegan lens focused. So a lot of them also talk about like the relations of animals into like labor and work organizations. So it's quite a broad subject. There are people coming from management studies, but also like vegans wanting to like veganize management studies. And that's what I want to pioneer and like revolutionize management studies, because I've studied sociology in my undergraduate and then management for my master's, and it just drove me insane that like there's absolutely no relation whatsoever to the natural environment and non-human animals in management studies literature, apart from CSR, which is corporate social responsibility. So I wrote my master's dissertation on that as well, why non-human animals should be incorporated in business ethics discipline. Sorry, English is my second language, so like some words, I'm like, my brain goes Turkish, you know, and then I'm like, right, they're not going to understand, but sorry for that. So I think human relations are essential in organization studies because they can teach us about the significance of discourse, identity, power, and resistance, and these things are like critical to what critical research is. So I want this project to inherently show to management studies scholars that animals matter and how animals inherently resist these harmful practices, anthropocentric practices in some theory. And here's a quote by a critical management scholar about why critical organization studies should even consider non-human animal relations. So questions of power, dominance, and the role of the non-human belong firmly within the mainstream of critical organization studies and deserve close attention from those already mindful of the difficulties that taxonomies, binaries, and boundaries entail. So a lot of like discourse and like how boundaries, identities, these binaries and dialectics play around in critical management studies as well. Well, when I say critical management studies, I also mean like critical organization studies. But some scholars have different discourse, I guess. So don't get confused, they're the same thing. So as I said, I'm all over the place. So I've got like loads of research questions. The first potential research question is, and during the discussions, I want to know like which one is better suited to this project, or where you think would be a better potential path for me. So my first question is, how are different forms of knowledge and discourses socially constructed and sustained within organizational practices, routines and rituals that ignore the link between the treatment of non-human animals, zoonotic diseases and the climate crises? Very wordy, I know. It will get chopped down. Well, so basically I want to look at like how maybe perhaps discourses are constructed and how that plays into normalizing the anthropocentrism in certain organizations. And I will get to which organizations I'm potentially considering. Second question, how do processes of major systemic change take place, and how could they be applied to organization studies to challenge and change anthropocentric ways of organizing? By that I mean I'm not and finally, how could the animal industrial complex be radically reconfigured to ensure alternative post-humanist ways of organizing, to shift from animal intensive to organic agriculture farming systems? This is very idealistic utopia question, so I wasn't sure whether to include that, but obviously the vegan utopia that we want to live in will be a world with organic vegan farming systems. So I'd also like to think about how we could imagine that possibility as well, hopefully. Right, so one organization that I'm really interested in researching is Animal Rising, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with them. They used to be called Animal Rebellion, and I'm interested in them because when they formed in 2019, I was actually an undergraduate, and I wasn't even, thinking about activism, but I saw their like campaigns, and they occupied Smithfield Meat Market. That was the biggest occupation that they've done. And I was with them, and I thought, like, this movement will bring back the animal advocacy movement again. And as you may have come across, the animal rights movement, particularly in the West, has been like sidestepped. They used to be really active in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but in the last decade, they haven't really been animal focused. The focus has been mostly like nature, like eco-activism. So I'm really interested in doing it like with like an animal rights focused organization, and like seeing Louis' presentation, potentially maybe other UK vegan charities could work. But I want to also look into social movements literature, and the reason why I want Animal Rising rather than like animal charity is that they are like more political and inherently like working to mobilize the masses. So there's also that potential of going into social movement literature. And so what I would be doing an ethnography, looking at their tactics and see how they resist the discourses that are constructed within society, particularly around farmed animals, and how that form of hegemonic practices are naturalized and systemized. So the potential discourses, and how, like, for example, how they engage with the public, their tactics and strategies. And that would fit into organization studies because social movement organizations are also organizations. So I'm very chuffed about that. I thought, when you think about management studies, you're like, multinationals, like money, big bang, But then I was like, actually, could I research a social movement organization? And they were like, what, you'd never ask, Melda? Like, go on. My supervisors are very radical, like lush human beings. So of course they were very supportive, but I had my doubts. So this is the first time I'm like coming out about this research idea, like in public, because I was so scared during my PhD interview. I thought, you know, they would think I was a radical, didn't tell them I was an activist or like vegan my entire life. But anyway, yeah, so this is also very interesting because management studies have never looked at social, not never, but not particularly animal advocacy movements and organizations. So what do I expect to achieve apart from animal liberation and taking over the world? Well, I want to explore how anthropocentrism has become entrenched and embedded in organizational practices, how that's normalized, and how they continue to sell this narrative. And there are links, obvious links, linked to non-human animal suffering, climate crisis, and zoonotic diseases. So I'm thinking maybe because there's like the three of them, there's non-human animal suffering, zoonotic diseases. Maybe that's a bit too much. So if you have any comments on that, I'd be really happy to hear that. Also, I'd like to establish an interdisciplinary inquiry involving the intermarriage between critical animal studies and critical biological studies, advance these fields, and hopefully get them the curriculum of universities everywhere, all over the world, galaxy, to propose novel theoretical and practical insights into radically transforming these horrible animal-intensive food production systems, look at ways and how we can establish organic practices. Obviously, finally, I want this research to be an expression of hope for everyone out there, academics, activists. I want to get activists to get academics to get in touch with activists and you know, get the scholar activist vibe back in academia again, make academia slay again. So that's another expected research outcome that I'm hoping to achieve. Thank you.
My question's for Diego.
Yes, of course.
Great. But I just yeah, first of all, I wanted to say I completely agree. I've made an argument for our moral duty to help wild non-human animals who are dependent on us, our big cities and take over of the planet. But I wanted to say, I wanted to ask really, with a completely open mind, just interested in what you think about it. I have some opinions about it. Are there components of this entanglement, this dependency, that should be celebrated, the entanglement? Is there some elements of it to be celebrated? Or do we have a moral duty to try and reduce this dependency in all instances? Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Well, when I think about well, as a matter of responding to that question, I guess we can just think of whether those entanglements and those dependencies are beneficial or harmful for humans and animals. And I guess that's a very difficult question to answer, because I can think in some cases in which the relation is beneficial for both of the parties. So when I go, so I live in Sheffield, when I go to a public park and I see some ducks there or swans, that's fantastic for me. And it's also fantastic for them because the local council takes care of them and feeds them and takes care of the park. So the park is a good place for them to be. And that's fantastic for them and for me, because I really like watching the birds there. But there are other kinds of relationships that are not great for both parties, and especially not great for the animals. So if we think of how we treat rats or mice, personally, in my case, so if I see a mouse outside my house, I wouldn't care. But most people would be horrified by looking at the mice or the rat, and for that reason, most houses have poison outside of their doors, and I think that's horrible. So my paper wasn't trying to evaluate whether those relations should be maintained or eliminated. I was agnostic on that. I just say whether, considering that those relations exist, and that currently exist, and that is very unlikely that those relations will be abolished, precisely because more and more people are living in cities, and cities are expanding, and we are destroying the natural environment. Considering that these relations exist, then what are the moral implications of that? Yeah, that's my response. I'm sorry if I can't be more specific. Although if maybe it is interesting for you, but there's a philosopher in the University of Roehampton. She's called Angie Pepper, and she defends that. So she's against having companion animals, right? And she defends that most of the relation we have with domestic cats and dogs should be a relation of the relation we have with liminal animals. So the animals come and go. There are many animals living in our cities. We take care of them, not because they are our dogs or our cats, but just because they are sentient beings that should be taken care of. So yeah, if you want just to send her an email or something, I'm sure she will be happy to tell you more about that.
Great, thank you so much.
I've got a question for Diego as well. Diego, thank you. That made me, I'd never thought about liminal animals before. I had read Liverpool documentary. I really never thought about those kind of animals before. So that was really interesting to hear that you directed on it. I'm sure you might have heard about this objection before. But I don't believe this is not my stance. I just want to hear you out on do you think assisting wild animals would be kind of like turning nature into a zoo, you know, because they're wild, and isn't that anthropocentric in itself? Like if we did interfere with wild animals, would that just like be like a zoo, and that in itself, would that be problematic?
Yeah, I think it surely would be problematic, but I think that assisting animals in need does not imply turning nature into a zoo. There are certainly some people who propose that something. Well, it's not turning nature into a zoo, but intervening massively in nature to help wild animals. And again, in the paper, I tried to be agnostic regarding those views, because I think that in the case of liminal animals, so these animals that are wild and live in spaces like cities, that is the most paradigmatic case. There are many ways in which we can help the animals and at the same time conserve their autonomy, but not also that, but also enhance or preserve their autonomy. So if we think of a very common thing that happens is that birds fall out of their nest and simply die of starvation or are predated by other animals. Or when we run over, I don't know, a squirrel, or when we, I don't know, build a big building and a pigeon crashes against and gets injured. In those cases in which we can very easily help the animals, I don't think we would be turning nature into a zoo. So if we just, I don't know, take the pigeon to a veterinary center and cure the injuries and set the pigeon free, we would be, in fact, preserving the autonomy of the pigeon. Because I think it's very clear that the autonomy of the pigeon is reduced when she crashes against a building and gets injured. So yeah, I think that there are feasible ways of helping liminal animals that don't entail turning nature into a zoo or policing nature or more invasive ways of intervening in nature. Yeah.
One last follow-up. What do you think about feeding them? Like, for example, like I feed foxes.
Can you say that again, because I can't hear you clearly.
Like follow-up, I'm like not interested in this academically, but more like philosophically. Like, for example, feeding some liminal animals, like eating
liminal animals.
No, gosh, no. Feeding.
Oh, feeding liminal animals. Yeah. Well, the fact of feeding animals that are starving is actually a thing that in many places is already being done by political institutions. So it surely is done by individual people in public parks when they go and feed the dogs or feed the horses they see around or the deer. And in many cases, that is worse for them because, well, more availability of food implies that the animals spend less time looking for food and they spend more time reproducing, so the population grows. And in many cases, the fact that the population grows is good for the species, but bad for the individual animals because that would create less space for them, less space to protect from predators, more likelihood that disease is spread, and yeah, in general, less well-being. There's a clear correlation between population growth and well-being. So for that reason, what is done in cases where animals need to be fed, so when there's a problem of animal welfare due to lack of food, what institutions are doing when they want to help the animals is give food that includes something, so a chemical that would sterilize some of the animals. So this was done actually in Trafalgar Square in London. So, and this was done for pure anthropocentric reasons. So people enjoy the pigeons there and enjoy feeding the pigeons. But if everyone feeds the pigeons, that would create a problem both for the pigeons and for the people. So what has been done is, well, we allow the people to feed the pigeons, and we also put feeders around Trafalgar Square that include a product that sterilizes some of them, so people can feed them. The well-being of the pigeons improves because they have food available, but the population is reduced, so the animals that exist have good welfare instead of just having a great population with low levels of welfare. So yeah, feeding them is tricky, but there are methods to feed the animals without creating problems for them and for us.
Yeah, so as a vegan, this is one of my biggest dilemmas. There's like seagull that I feed called Mark, and he's like domesticated now by me, and all my neighbors are complaining, and like he's grown fat, so like
Yeah.
it was like chill, you know, he's hungry, but now like I'm worried about him. He's like a bit chubby, like but
Yeah.
he's still young, so I feel like I've domesticated him. So like I feel like I was that right, but he's a liminal animal, and like so that feeding dilemma is always like in the back of my mind because like I don't feel the same about hedgehogs like I put that them because like
Yeah.
hedgehogs are actually getting extinct, but like seagulls like we don't actually need to feed them. This is like kind of species thing, but like this is a question that keeps me up at night. So thanks so much for your feedback.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a specific response to that, but there are certainly some cases that are very tricky. So many people especially in rural areas have cats and dogs that they consider them to be their cats and dogs, right? But maybe the cats are outside their house for weeks, come back for a week, stay in the house, and then leave for 2 weeks again. And there, the boundary between what is a domestic and a liminal animal is, of course, blurred. And that's the case also with, well, I also have a friend who lives in a rural area, and a fox visits her house very usually, and the neighbors feed the fox, and the fox is perfectly happy. So yeah, there the boundary is again blurred, and those are the trickiest cases, and I don't have a clear response for those cases. But yeah, thank you for your question, and I'm sorry, during your presentation someone called me and I took the call, and I didn't know I wasn't mute. So yeah, sorry, because I interrupted you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Oh, is that?
yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's a quick question and suggestion. We talked about organisation. We talked about like structural organisation, say like an animal access organisation, and how that may be contrast kind of like conventional organisational structures. I guess like, you know, within the general model of most organisations very hierarchical. Now that's kind of like society. And I guess, you know, so it's got a big part of the top and, you know, everyone on the bottom, the workers that actually by having numbers like that. How, I guess, kind of unspoken part of that is like, if that's the hierarchy, the hierarchy is working on it's better within the bottom of that. So maybe like different organizational structures, more space for and not to be the bottom. More actively involved in the business. Yeah, both that and about.
No, I haven't thought about that. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question for Vesna. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more, because I don't think I've ever understood the difference between necropolitics, concept of necropolitics, compared to biopolitics. Because I was very interested, and I deeply understood that it's sort of centering the body as in raw material, flesh and blood and so on, and guts, as center of the agency of sport. But I wasn't quite sure that I understood the difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best answer is to like recommend reading. Yeah. Otherwise, before, I mean, liquid water is basically politics life and life. But it is also here from the word nectar is focused on that. So it's basically like in short, that would be like a radicalization of biopolitics. And it's not focused on decoloniality, it's focused on maybe South Africa. And it's sort of like an interrupting point in biopolitics. Like the darkest side of the biopolitics. I think that would be like yeah, my mentor, out of that, main platform, there are a lot of facts. Okay, we also, yeah, also find the most, I mean, first, article, not so yeah, biopolitics is in the body and it's in the flesh. But what I'll be doing is the part of the article, because there's the second part, to show that basically both biopolitics and politics as a concept to illustrate the human condition. That would be more regarding animals, they were both.
Thank you.
Anybody? Okay, so I know what we're thinking. I'm hungry, so we're going to do the break now. 5, 5 to 2. Okay, so we'll